The courage to be disliked. Do you often feel powerless to change your circumstances? Do you frequently feel exhausted by complicated interpersonal relationships? Are you constantly trapped in feelings of inferiority or pain? Do you feel that happiness is out of reach? This book presents Adler's philosophical ideas through a debate, showing us how to free ourselves from three common constraints: our past, our relationships, and our future. Everyone who reads it experiences a moment of profound enlightenment and exclaims with joy. In a way that completely upends our usual way of thinking, this book tells us that the world is incredibly simple. From this very moment, we can change, and everyone can achieve freedom and happiness without exception. All we need is the courage to change. Adler is one of the three giants in psychology, alongside Freud and Jung. When you think of psychology, you probably think of the famous Freud, whose core theory is based on causality, that our emotions and habits are always rooted in our past, and that our present and even our future is entirely determined by what has happened before. In contrast, the core idea of Adlerian psychology is teleology. This view holds that our behaviors are primarily determined by the goals we strive to achieve. Adler believed that the meaning we give to any past experience is something we choose for ourselves. In other words, we assign meaning to what we go through based on a certain purpose. While Freud argued that our fate is determined by our biological instincts, Adler emphasized the impact of social factors. He argued that none of us are imprisoned by our instincts or our past. Even though our past experiences have a significant impact, we can completely redefine them through our own efforts. We can perfect ourselves and achieve the life and happiness we desire. Adler has influenced many later thinkers. For instance, global bestsellers like How to Win Friends and Influence People and How to Enjoy Your Life and Your Job, as well as the master of interpersonal relationships, Dale Carnegie, have all praised Adler as a great psychologist who devoted his life to studying human potential. Many of his ideas are also reflected in his writings. Born in 1870, Adler may seem far removed in time, but his ideas are truly ahead of their times. His forward-thinking views are just as relevant and practical, guiding us today. They never go out of style. Living for a purpose, teleology. The courage to be disliked unfolds as a debate between a young man and a philosopher. The entire book tells the story of a young man lacking self-confidence and overwhelmed by worry who comes to the philosopher with a belly full of complaints and doubts. After 5 nights of deep, honest conversation, the young man finally experiences a moment of clarity. The young man who continually complained, questioned, and even denounced the philosopher voices doubts that are common to most of us. Adler's psychology liberates us from the bonds of our past, from our relationships, and from our imagined futures. When we free ourselves from these constraints, we realize that we have always been free. The only thing that really holds us back is ourselves. Now, let's dive into the courage to be disliked. Let's bring our own sorrows, doubts, and curiosities and join the young man as he knocks on the door of the philosopher's study. When we step out of that study, looking around, we'll feel refreshed and the world will seem much more beautiful. Entering Adler's teleology, let's listen to a conversation between a young man and a philosopher. The philosopher begins, "The world is incredibly simple. Everyone can change and everyone can achieve happiness without exception." After hearing this, the young man dismisses the idea as nothing more than a utopian fantasy, so he challenges the theory by saying, "Sir, you claim the world is simple. Perhaps it only seems that way to children. They have no material pressures, and the care of their parents shields them from the world's ugliness, filling them with boundless hope for the future. But once we grow up, we become tied down by so many responsibilities, work, family, and everything else. Even social issues like discrimination, war, or class differences, which we couldn't understand as kids, become inescapable. In such a situation, how can you still say the world is exceedingly simple? The philosopher replies, "It isn't the world that is complex and chaotic, it's that you make it appear so. We all live in our own subjective worlds. The world you see is different from what I see and from what anyone else sees." He continues, "Have you ever drunk well water? Its temperature remains constant, about 18 degrees all year round, yet in summer it feels cool and in winter it feels warm. This isn't an illusion caused by environmental change. The water really is 18 degrees and the sensations of coolness or warmth are real. The fact is, the world you see right now may seem chaotic, but if you change yourself, the world will become simple." The young man then said, "Sir, you're shifting the focus to self-change. Sure, people long for change, but why do they all long for it? It's because most of us simply can't change. I have a friend who spent years locked away at home, never venturing out. He desperately wants to live a normal life outside, yet every time he steps out of his room, he's overwhelmed with panic. His heart races and his hands and feet tremble. This is likely a form of neurosis, perhaps stemming from troubled relationships with his parents or the emotional trauma of setbacks at school or work. In short, for one reason or another, he just can't go out. In such a case, sir, how do you propose we help him change?" The philosopher answered, "What you're really suggesting is that your friend's inability to go out is caused by some past event, that you believe his current state is determined by his past. But if we focus solely on past causes to explain everything, we end up concluding that our present and even our future is entirely determined by what has happened before. If you truly believe that, then your friend would never be able to step outside again." He goes on, "What I want to tell you is this. Adler believes that it's not the experience itself that defines us, but the meaning we give to that experience. Say, enduring a major disaster or suffering abuse in early childhood. These events do influence our personality, and their impact can be significant, but it isn't inevitable that they produce a fixed outcome. We determine our lives by the meaning we give to our past experiences. Life isn't something handed to us by others, it's something we choose for ourselves. How we live our lives is up to us. Take your friend, for example. It's not that he can't go out because he's anxious. Quite the opposite. He doesn't want to go out. He already has the goal of staying inside, and then he creates feelings of anxiety or fear to justify it. I'm not saying he's faking his symptoms. His trembling, his shortness of breath are real, but they're produced in order to serve his goal of not going out." He then adds, "Suppose your friend believes he can't adapt to society because he was abused by his parents. That belief shows that deep down he already has the purpose of not leaving his room. If he never steps out, his parents will worry, and they'll keep a close, even overprotective eye on him. But if he does step out, he risks becoming just another face in the crowd, ordinary and unnoticed, no longer cherished as he once was. This is the psychology typical of recluses." He concludes, "Your friend is discontented and unhappy, yet he is acting in accordance with a purpose. And it's not only him. Each of us lives for some purpose. That is teleology. What you just described about your friend is a view based on causality, but what I'm explaining in Adlerian psychology is teleology. Adler says that no single experience is the root cause of success or failure, and we don't suffer forever because of the pain in our past. In fact, we find in our experiences the factors that fit with our current goals. So everything that happened in the past is merely an objective fact, like the well water at 18 degrees. On the other hand, our perception of whether that water feels warm or cool is a subjective feeling in the present. No matter what happened in the past, the meaning it carries is entirely what we assign to it. If we keep relying on causality, we'll never move forward. But if we embrace teleology, change can happen immediately. This is Adler's teleological view, a perspective that reminds us that our lives are not fixed by our past, but are instead open to change by the meanings we choose to give our experiences. Emotions are also fabricated.
After hearing the explanation, the young man still couldn't fully accept it and asked, "Yesterday I was reading a book at a coffee shop when a waiter accidentally spilled coffee on my jacket. I just couldn't hold it in. I lost my temper and yelled at him. Clearly, my anger was a response to his mistake. How does teleology explain that?" The philosopher replied, "It can be explained, of course, in terms of Adler's teleology. You felt that you had been wronged by the waiter, so you needed to intimidate him for his mistake. In order to achieve that, you fabricated the emotion of anger as a tool. Now imagine if that waiter were a charming young woman and you fell in love with her at first sight. What kind of emotion would you display then? You'd probably act with grace and go over to comfort her because you'd want to make a good impression. In other words, even when someone offends us, the emotion we express is ultimately a choice we make. Once we set aside causality and embrace teleology, we can begin to adjust our emotions accordingly. Change can happen in an
All misfortunes are our own choice. Adler once said, "All misfortunes are our own choice." He explained that being able to happily accept who we are right now is the first step toward positive change, and it's the key to achieving happiness. What matters isn't what fate has given us, but the meaning we choose to assign to those things and how we make use of them. We might often think, "I wish I'd been born into a wealthy family," or "I wish I were as handsome as others." And then we end up complaining about the unfairness of the world and lamenting our own misfortune. In reality, as Adler points out, our desire to be someone else comes from our obsessive focus on what we were given. Instead, we should shift our attention to how we can best use what we have. For example, being born into a poor family is an objective fact. But if someone sees their poverty as the very motivation that drives them to work hard, to keep improving, and to cherish the life they have, then they have chosen to give meaning to what fate handed them. In response, the philosopher in our discussion delivered a hard-hitting truth. The reason you feel unhappy right now is because you've chosen unhappiness for yourself. You're not unhappy because you were born unlucky. It's a startling idea, isn't it? But how should we understand it? When the philosopher says we choose our own misfortune, he means that we decide that our past hardships define our present circumstances. When we complain about not being born rich, we are in effect accepting our poverty. When we grumble about not being attractive, we're finding a perfect excuse to avoid pursuing what we want. Our complaints are real, and our misfortunes are truly self-chosen. The meaning we assign to our past, whether it's good or bad, is a choice we make. There's no denying that our experiences have a deep impact on us. But the key issue isn't the past, it's how we look at our past experiences in the present. We have the power to choose our perspective, and that choice will determine what actions we take next. That, in turn, shapes our future. From the perspective of teleology, most of us complain about our misfortunes because, deep down, we have subconsciously decided not to change. We think that staying the same is easier and more comforting. And this brings us back to the crucial point: courage. Changing one's way of life takes tremendous courage. Gaining time, money, and opportunity starts with courage. Maybe you want to stick with an exercise routine to achieve a healthier life. Maybe you dream of taking a risk to pursue the career you really desire and explore new possibilities in life. But do you truly have the courage to change? Do you really have the courage to pursue happiness? Have you truly decided to change? Many people simply lack the courage. They've subconsciously made up their minds not to change. They say things like, "If I had more time, I'd go to the gym. If I had more money, I'd travel to the places I want. Or, if I had the opportunity, I'd try starting the business I've always dreamed of." The truth is, none of this is about time, money, or opportunity. It's all about courage, about the decision to change. In fact, gaining more time, money, and opportunities all begins with having courage. Believing in teleology, that we can change, reminds us that we can choose our own way of life at any moment. The reason we can't change isn't because we're incapable, but because we keep deciding not to change. We lack the courage to choose a new way of living, and thus we lack the courage to be happy. That's why many of us end up not believing in change. Even if these ideas may seem hard to accept at first, they are the truth. No matter what has happened in our past, it does not determine how we will live our lives from now on. How we choose to view our past experiences decides our present and our future. Adler's ideas, which overturn our conventional way of thinking, might be difficult to accept at first and may even raise many doubts. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment and join the discussion. Everyone has feelings of inferiority. After their last conversation, the young man returned to the philosopher's study exactly a week later with a new set of questions. This time, the philosopher uses Adler's teleological perspective to completely dissect the nature of interpersonal relationships. The young man begins, "Sir, you once told me that happily accepting who we are is not only the first step toward positive change, but also the key to true happiness. But I can't find any reason to like myself. I truly lack confidence, I'm pessimistic about everything, and I care too much about what others think. My life feels like I'm constantly performing on a stage. It's completely unnatural. I'm not satisfied with my appearance or my body. I hate myself. According to your idea of teleology, how do you explain this? Is hating myself also serving some kind of purpose? What benefit could it possibly bring me?" The philosopher responds, "I see. Let's set aside the facts for a moment. The real question is why you feel this way. You only focus on your flaws because you've subconsciously decided not to like yourself. Let me give you an example. There was once a young woman who came to me for help because she had a fear of blushing. Whenever she spoke with others, she would become shy and her face would turn red. She told me that once her blushing was cured, she planned to confess her feelings to the man she admired. On the surface, it seemed that she wanted to cure her condition to pursue love. But I told her that wasn't really the case. In truth, she needed the symptom of blushing. For her, the most terrifying thing wasn't blushing itself. It was the possibility of being rejected by the man she admired. The idea, the fear that her unrequited love would shatter her sense of self. As long as she continued to blush, she could use that as an excuse to say, he won't date me because of my blushing, and live in a fantasy that if only her blushing disappeared, she might be with him. In short, her blushing became the very excuse she invented for herself. The young man then asked, "So what did you do to help her? Did you just ignore her complaints?" After listening, the philosopher replied, "No, I explained that her lack of self-confidence led her to believe that if she confessed her feelings, she'd be rejected, and she was so terrified of that outcome that she ended up developing her fear of blushing. What I did was to help her learn to accept herself as she is, so that regardless of the outcome, she would have the courage to move forward." The young man was struck by the philosopher's words because he realized a truth he'd long refused to face. According to Adler, it's impossible to avoid getting hurt in interpersonal relationships. Others will hurt you, and you will hurt others. In fact, the philosopher even claimed that all of our troubles stem from our relationships with other people. To illustrate further, consider this extreme scenario. If you were the only person in the entire universe, would you feel lonely? The answer is no, because loneliness isn't simply about being alone. It comes from feeling excluded or abandoned by others, by society, or by a shared community. True loneliness only exists when there are others around from whom you feel isolated. After all, it's within social relationships that we become human. So if you were truly alone, you wouldn't experience the troubles of loneliness or the burdens of judgment. We might also think that, apart from interpersonal issues, we face inner struggles, moments of self-inflicted misery. But Adler argues that such internal worries don't really exist. If you were alone, even pain, death, and all matters of right and wrong would be defined solely by you, without any comparisons or external standards. Adler's seminal work, The Individual Psychology of Alfred Adler, is titled Inferiority and Beyond, because he believed that inferiority is at the core of human psychology. He claimed that these feelings form the basis of our culture. Everyone wants to overcome them, to escape that sense of inferiority.
Why then does he say that inferiority is the foundation of human culture? Because it is precisely our feelings of inferiority that propel us to progress. We might assume that those who are successful in society, like entrepreneurs like Elon Musk or celebrities like Andy Lau, must be free of inferiority. However, Adler asserted that everyone experiences inferiority. In individual psychology, the term inferiority complex isn't a negative label, it's a neutral term that everyone has and that drives us to compensate for our perceived shortcomings by seeking superiority. Adler explained that the kind of superiority one pursues is directly linked to one's own sense of inferiority. For example, many doctors experienced the death of a loved one in childhood, which instilled in them a feeling of life's insecurity. To overcome that, they chose to become doctors to confront death, thereby fulfilling a need to prove themselves. Whether it's the pursuit of wealth or the quest for spiritual freedom, the methods we choose to compensate for our inferiority and achieve superiority reflect our character. In Adler's words, they reveal our life attitude. So, in individual psychology, inferiority is like an engine providing drive from behind, while the desire for superiority acts like the locomotive pulling you forward. Together, they fuel our drive to transcend ourselves. But if the feelings of inferiority go too far, they stop being a source of drive and instead turn into a crippling inferiority complex, a negative emotion. We often hear people complain, "I can't succeed because I have low educational credentials," or "I can't get a happy marriage because I'm not attractive." When people loudly proclaim these limitations as reasons for their failures, it's a classic case of inferiority complex. Why is that? We once believed that success was directly linked.
Life is not a competition. Life isn't about competing with others. We're driven by feelings of inferiority to constantly pursue superiority. But here's an important point. Pursuing superiority isn't about beating others. It's about surpassing our own limits, about self-improvement rather than being better than someone else. We're all used to comparing ourselves with those around us, and that often leaves us feeling insecure. Think about it. Nobody gets upset because a billionaire earned a few more millions this month. But if your neighbor earns significantly more than you do, it can really get under your skin. Adler taught that a healthy sense of inferiority doesn't come from comparing ourselves with others. It comes from comparing ourselves with the ideal version of who we want to be. When we compare ourselves to others, we end up thinking, "I'm better than this," or "I'm worse than that." And that's when both an inferiority complex and a superiority complex can arise. When we're stuck in competition, everyone around us becomes either a rival or even an enemy. Constantly being in a competitive mindset means you're never at ease because you're always striving to win. Many people might achieve conventional success in society yet still feel unhappy because they're caught up in competition. In their eyes, the whole world is out to get them. But really, does anyone truly watch us all the time, scrutinizing us for mistakes? The truth is, no one does. We notice little imperfections, like a few spots on our face, or thinking our legs are too thick, our waist too round, or our hairstyle isn't quite right. But the harsh reality is that others don't really care. Maybe you feel embarrassed all day because your outfit doesn't match, but most people won't even notice. Even if you were to do something as bizarre as standing on your head in public, hardly anyone would give you a second glance. Because we view relationships as a competition, we can't genuinely celebrate someone else's happiness. When we equate other success with our own failure, we find it hard to offer sincere congratulations. But if we step out of this competitive mindset, there's no need to beat anyone else. We can free ourselves from the anxiety of losing, truly wish others well from the bottom of our hearts, and even contribute positively to their happiness. When someone in need reaches out to you, that person becomes a partner, not a competitor. So, by stepping away from competition, our rivals become our partners.
We no longer have to live in suspicion. Our environment becomes safer and more comfortable, and our interpersonal woes diminish significantly. Freedom means living for yourself, not for others' expectations. This is the third debate in this session. The young man, inspired by the philosopher, begins to explore the nature of his relationships with others. Their discussion turns to the question, what does it really mean to be free? When we think of freedom, many people immediately think of money. There's even a saying, money is cast into freedom. With enough money, you wouldn't even have to go to work. You could do whatever you want, and that would make you free, right? But our society exaggerates our craving for money and the happiness it supposedly brings. The philosopher explains that even if you have a huge fortune, you might still end up without a loving partner, without genuine friends, and with a troubled family. Material wealth can't solve these problems. True freedom isn't about having more money. It's about releasing yourself from the bonds that come from other people. Adler tells us, let go of the need for approval, whether it's from your parents, elders, friends, colleagues, or bosses. If you want to be accepted by those around you, you're forced to follow their advice. Think about it. Don't we all long for that kind of approval? For example, the young man in our story feels deep frustration because he didn't follow the career his parents wanted for him, and his relationship with them is strained. How many of us rush into marriage just because our elders push us to do so? Or work overtime just to win our boss's approval, even when that boss's word seems to matter more than our own well-being? All these choices that feel unfree are driven by our pursuit of other people's approval, the need to meet their expectations. Why do we feel compelled to seek their approval? Because that's the only way we feel our own value. When we receive praise from others, it temporarily fills the void of our low self-esteem and boosts our confidence. There's even a saying in Judaism, if you don't live your life for yourself, who will live it for you? Ultimately, all of this is meant to explain that the meaning of life isn't about satisfying others' expectations, but about living true to yourself. Constantly chasing after others' expectations means you're ending up living someone else's life. In fact, most people who feel unfree do so because they live to please others. They're so preoccupied with meeting external expectations that they lose sight of who they really are. Adler's perspective isn't telling us to be selfish. Rather, it challenges us to reflect. If you make all your choices based on others' approval, who ends up bearing the consequences? Is it you? If you choose a job you don't like just to please your parents, forcing you to drag yourself to work every day, is it you? If you rush into marriage because your elders demand it, only to spend your life with someone you don't truly love, is it you? Or is it you if you constantly work overtime and sacrifice your health just to win your boss's favor? The bottom line is that the choices you make about your career, who you marry, and how you balance work and life are your responsibilities, your business. This idea, known as task separation, is one of the revolutionary points of the book. It means that you must separate your own tasks from others. In other words, let your choices and their consequences be yours alone. Don't meddle in other people's tasks, and don't worry about them meddling in yours. That's it. Simple as that. Freedom means living for yourself. Parents and children have their own lessons to learn. When a child refuses to study, should parents just let it be? And when someone kindly offers help, should we brusquely push them away by saying, "Mind your business"? Isn't that just dismissing someone's good intentions? Let's start with the first issue, task separation between parents and children. If a child doesn't love to study, the consequences are ultimately the child's to bear. No matter how much parents try to shoulder the child's responsibilities, the child remains an independent person. As parents, we can't enroll them in college, get them a job, arrange their marriage, or live their entire life for them, not even just to be a companion. Similarly, a child isn't meant to live just to fulfill their parents' expectations. The philosopher explains that although parents often say things like, "I only do this for your own good," their actions sometimes serve their own need for approval, vanity, or even a desire to control. Children can see through this, and they often rebel as a result. When it comes to the child's own learning challenges, it's not a matter of leaving them entirely to their own devices. Adler's idea is that we should protect our children based on a genuine understanding of what they're doing by building a relationship based on mutual trust, so that the child feels understood, supported, and encouraged. When it comes to studying, the most important thing is to help the child understand that this is their own task. They must bear the consequences of their choices, but at the same time, parents should always be ready to help when the child is willing to learn. There's a saying, "You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink." If you force your child to learn without igniting their own desire, you're likely to meet strong resistance. We often see rebellious teenagers because of this. Even in the closest relationships between parents and children, it's crucial to set clear boundaries. In fact, it's precisely because they're family that it's so important to consciously separate tasks and let children take responsibility for their own lives. But what about when we're the children? What if our parents impose their will on us, dictating our career choices or vehemently opposing our choice of partner, with a father who rages and a mother who weeps, even going so far as to sever the parent-child bond? The philosopher says you really don't have to worry about that. In your own life, all you can do is choose the path that you believe is best. How others judge your choices is theirs to own. You have no control over that. Because we care too much about what other people think, we end up seeking their approval and mistakenly treating their tasks as our own. Even though that sounds harsh, deep down it feels too cold and unfeeling. Yet we face these issues every day. If we can't see through life's lies, if we can't think in terms of teleology, if we can't practice task separation, then our relationships will always remain complicated and will fall into the habit of avoiding problems. Can this way of drawing boundaries between ourselves and others really work in a moral or ethical sense? When someone offers you help out of goodwill, should you also push them away with a "mind your business"? Isn't that just trampling on their kindness? To illustrate, the philosopher tells a story. When the Macedonian king Alexander set out to conquer Persia, a chariot was displayed in the temple, a chariot that had been tied up to a pillar by the former king Gordius.
Legend had it that whoever could untie this knot would become the ruler of Asia, yet no one had ever managed to do it. Faced with this knot, Alexander didn't fumble around trying to untie it. He drew his short sword and cut it in two. Alexander declared, "Fate is not determined by legend, but by one's own actions. I don't need the power of legends. I need my own sword to forge my destiny." And later, he became the emperor of a vast empire stretching from the Middle East to Asia. This Gordian knot became a famous story, a metaphor for the tangled bonds in our interpersonal relationships that can't be unraveled by conventional means. Alexander's sword represents task separation in relationships. The key difference is that while a sword cuts the knot, task separation isn't about completely severing our bonds with others. It's not the ultimate goal of relationships, it's a means to achieve healthy relationships. Think of it like reading a book. If you hold the book too close, you can't see anything clearly. Similarly, healthy relationships require a certain distance. Of course, that distance shouldn't be so far that you're disconnected. It should be just enough to be within reach without intruding on the other person's space. Maintaining that balance is crucial. Coming back to our central question, claiming that task separation is about dismissing others' kindness is really a result of being trapped by the idea of reciprocity. If someone does something you didn't expect, must you always repay them? That isn't about repaying kindness at all, it's about being bound by expectations. According to Adler's teleology, no matter what someone else does, the decision on how to respond is entirely up to you. The idea of reciprocation conflicts with task separation. You should neither seek repayment nor be bound by it. In many cases, interfering directly in someone else's task is easier than practicing task separation. For instance, if a child always struggles with tying their shoelaces, it might be easiest for a busy mother to just tie them for the child. But if you keep doing that, the child never learns to face their own challenges and eventually loses the courage to tackle life's problems. Adler once said, "A child who never learns to confront difficulties will eventually try to escape from every challenge." When Alexander cut the Gordian knot with his sword, many thought his method was wrong. The only untangling the knot by hand had meaning. Alexander misunderstood the oracle, and many found his approach unacceptable. Similarly, when we first encounter Adler's theories, they can seem exceptionally harsh and counterintuitive. Rejecting causality, denying trauma, adopting teleology, and claiming that our problems all stem from our relationships. These ideas might sound logical, but they are hard to accept fully. Grasping Adler's ideas and applying them to every aspect of life is a long and arduous process. That's why we come to believe in his power. There are no shortcuts to success. The hardships and challenges we face are the solid, unyielding steps that lift us higher. Our parents truly love us and our friends really care about us, but if there are 10 people around us offering reasonable advice for our future, must we follow all 10 pieces of advice and meet all 10 expectations? Isn't that deceiving not only ourselves but also others? We simply cannot satisfy everyone's expectations. In the end, all we can do is lie to ourselves, continuously lying to those who expect something from us. Does Adler really want us to live selfishly and arbitrarily? In truth, task separation isn't about being self-centered. Rather, those who meddle in other people's tasks are the ones who are truly self-centered. Adults who choose an unfree lifestyle criticize young people who live freely, calling it hedonism. But in reality, those criticisms are just the lies they tell themselves to accept their own unfree lives. And if our own parents are like that, they will even discourage us from striving for true freedom. What is freedom? Freedom means no longer being afraid of being disliked. Let's face it, being disliked hurts, and we often try to please everyone, but that's simply impossible, and trying to do so only robs us of our freedom. To be truly free, we must be willing to pay a price. The price of not caring about others' opinions, of not being fear of rejection, and of not chasing after other people's approval. It means living life on your own terms, pushing forward boldly instead of following the crowd, forging ahead like a daring river cutting its own path. That, in essence, is freedom. We need the courage to be disliked. When faced with two options, one in which everyone likes you and another in which you live the life you truly want, you'll choose the latter without hesitation, because what matters most isn't how others see you, but how you live your own life. And that is the essence of a free life.
The ultimate goal of interpersonal relationships. Task separation isn't about being self-centered or completely ignoring others. It's not about severing all ties between people. Rather, it's a means to achieve healthier relationships. In the fourth debate between the philosopher and the young man, their discussion deepens into the complex topic of relationships. The young man says, task separation is just about drawing clear boundaries between myself and others, but it seems like a self-centered and misguided way of living. No wonder Adler's ideas are sometimes labeled as individual psychology. The philosopher explains, the term individual in individual psychology can be misleading. In fact, individual implies an inseparable whole. Adler believed that the mind and body are one. In truth, the opposite is true. Those who cling solely to seeking others' approval are the ones who are truly self-centered. Such people are most concerned with how others perceive and evaluate them. Essentially, they are only focused on satisfying their own need for approval. Though it might appear that they're paying attention to others, in reality, they're just watching the reflection of themselves in other people's eyes. Most people seem to do their utmost to please others, but they're merely trying to satisfy their own craving for approval. Of course, you are the main character in your own life. There's nothing wrong with that.
However, we often mistakenly believe that we are the center of the universe, expecting everyone to notice us. When interacting with others, we might focus on what they can do for us, but such expectations are rarely met because people aren't living to fulfill our desires. As a result, we end up feeling deeply disappointed, hurt, and even resentful. To understand this better, just look at world maps from different countries. In the maps we use, Asia is drawn in the center, with the Americas to the right and Europe to the left. But the French map places Europe and France at the center, with America and Asia on the sides. When a French person sees our map, it looks off balance, as if they're pushed to the margins. The truth isn't in any one map, it's in the globe. Every place is a center, and every place is part of the world. In the same way, none of us is the center of the universe. We're all part of a larger whole. It sounds simple, but it carries profound meaning. Once you hear the rest of the discussion, you'll understand even more. Earlier we said task separation is just the starting point for relationships. So what's the end goal? Adler tells us it's a sense of community, a feeling of I belong here. When we think of community, we might first think of our family, school, workplace, hometown, or country. But Adler's concept of community even extends to the entire universe, as well as the past and future. He spoke of community as an infinite concept. So why must we confine ourselves to what we see right in front of us? We all belong to something bigger, whether it's our region, our society, or our nation. Our value can be expressed on a grander scale. The philosopher tells the young man that when we encounter difficulties or feel trapped in our relationships, we should start by listening to the voice of a larger community. For example, in school, the teacher might be the ultimate authority, but if you consider yourself as part of the broader society, then you and your teacher are equals. If your teacher makes unreasonable demands, you can firmly refuse them without being limited by the small circle of that school. In the vast, broader world, far more fulfilling relationships await. What is big? When you look up at the starry sky, that vastness is big. What is small? Finding your place in that endless sky is small. Perhaps when you carry a sense of an expansive starry sky in your heart, when you believe you belong to a universe-scale community, you'll feel free in everything you do. Establishing horizontal relationships. Let's start from task separation. The ultimate goal of building horizontal relationships is to develop a sense of community, or simply the feeling that I belong here. But how exactly do we do that? At this point, the philosopher introduces the concept of horizontal relationships. Adler's idea here is very intriguing. Consider this example. When parents educate their children, or when a boss trains their subordinates, we usually see two approaches. One is criticism, and the other is praise. Adler's stance, however, rejects both criticism and praise. Whether it's saying, what you did is terrible, or you did a great job, both inherently create a top-down, vertical relationship. The only difference is whether you're using a whip or a sugar cane, but regardless, both methods aim to control the other person. Remember what we discussed earlier. Although people are different, we are all equal. So what should we do? If neither praise nor criticism is the answer, then what is? Think about when an equal partner lends you a hand at work. The answer comes naturally. When a friend helps you clean your room, what do you say? You say thank you, expressing gratitude. You might say, I'm so happy to share your joy, or you really helped me out, to show respect. The philosopher calls this type of dialogue based on horizontal relationships encouragement. That's all there is to it. The most important thing is not to judge others, because judgment only reinforces vertical hierarchies. What we need to do is, within the framework of horizontal relationships, genuinely express our gratitude, share our joy, and show respect. According to Adler, when we let others' praise or criticism determine whether our actions are good or bad, we're measuring ourselves by someone else's standards. If you want praise, you have no choice but to conform to those standards, and that undermines your freedom. But a simple thank you isn't a judgment, it's pure gratitude. When you hear sincere thanks, you clearly feel that you've made a positive contribution. Adler placed great importance on the idea of contribution, because only when you feel valuable can you truly accept yourself and muster the courage to face life's challenges. So, how do you come to feel your own value? It starts with the belief that you can help others. By realizing that you contribute to the community, you begin to see your own worth. Establishing horizontal relationships must start with me, regardless if others cooperate. A sense of community, gratitude for simply being, is what horizontal relationships are all about. These theories sound great, but who can truly put them into practice? When this question was raised, someone even challenged Adler on this. His answer was simple. It all must begin with us, without worrying about whether others cooperate. When it comes to building horizontal relationships, traditionally we've been used to forming vertical relationships, following the hierarchy set by our leaders and mentors, and then interacting with colleagues and friends on a more equal horizontal level. In reality, however, we can't switch between these two modes at will. We must choose one, and they simply can't coexist. Once you establish a vertical relationship with someone, you tend to apply that same approach to all your interactions. Even if you try not to view your relationships with colleagues and friends in a hierarchical way, you still end up thinking things like, they're better than me, or they're not as good as me, or even questioning agreements as if they were negotiable. Horizontal relationships aren't about treating everyone exactly like a friend. It's about maintaining a mindset of equality and sticking to your own principles. When you're constantly scanning for subtle cues from your boss and defining your relationship in a vertical way, you're just trying to dodge responsibility. Why? Because if you follow your boss's orders to a fault and then fail, you'll naturally blame your boss, saying, "I was just following your instructions." That, in essence, is the lie of life. We can't use the inability to refuse our leader as an excuse to passively accept a vertical relationship just to avoid interpersonal conflicts and dodge responsibility. We can, in fact, reject that model and propose better alternatives. And whether the boss adopts them is his problem, not ours. Establishing horizontal relationships has to start with us, regardless if others join in. That bold, uncompromising stance can be shocking, but change must begin from within. It takes tremendous courage to change yourself, courage that ultimately frees you from the entanglements of complicated relationships.
The method to attain a sense of community. Let's take our understanding a step further. How do we actually develop a sense of community? According to Adler, there are 3 key elements: self-acceptance, trust in others, and contributing to others. Let's break these down one by one. First, self-acceptance. I'm sure you've noticed that you behave very differently when you're in public compared to when you're alone. For example, you might be too afraid to speak up in meetings, constantly worrying that if you say something wrong, you'll be ridiculed or looked down upon. You might even avoid making small jokes in front of strangers. We're often so afraid of showing any sign of weakness that we label any misstep as a loss of face. Yet when we're alone, we can let our guard down. We sing loudly, dance freely to music, or engage in deep, uninhibited conversation. The stark contrast between these two states shows that, deep down, we're afraid to reveal our true selves. It's important here to distinguish between self-affirmation and self-acceptance. Self-affirmation is when you lie to yourself by insisting, "I can do this," even if you know you can't. In contrast, self-acceptance means honestly admitting, "I can't do this right now," and then making a genuine effort to improve without lying to yourself. The key isn't about what we're given, but about how we make the best use of what we have. We need to distinguish what we can change from what we cannot, and focus on the changeable aspects. That, my friends, is self-acceptance. Next, let's talk about trust. When we talk about trusting others, we need to consider 2 different meanings behind trust. One is credit, trust that comes with conditions, and the other is unconditional trust. Think about how banks work. When you get a loan, you often have to offer collateral. That's credit. If you pay me back, I'll lend you the money. Many of us rely on this conditional trust in our everyday relationships. However, Adler believed that the foundation of healthy relationships isn't built on credit, but on unconditional trust, a kind of trust without any strings attached. Now you might wonder, isn't unconditional trust risky? Couldn't it lead to being betrayed? It might seem so, much like a bank that lends money without checking credit would suffer losses. But here's the point. While trusting others unconditionally might expose you to occasional betrayal, if you keep worrying about it, you'll never be able to form deep, meaningful relationships.
Remember, whether you choose to engage with someone or decide to cut ties is your own responsibility, and if you consistently fear being hurt, you'll never allow those rich relationships to flourish. On the other hand, when you muster the courage to trust others and deepen your relationships, you naturally experience greater joy in life. When you truly accept yourself and give unconditional trust to others, they become partners, and by viewing others as partners, you'll find your place within the community, a genuine sense of belonging. Finally, let's discuss contributing to others. When we talk about contribution, many people immediately think of self-sacrifice, giving so much of yourself conditionally to others. But Adler's notion of contribution isn't about sacrificing yourself for others. In fact, he opposed that idea. To contribute means to take actions that affirm your own value. The easiest way to understand this is through work. The philosopher redefined work by saying that it isn't merely a way to earn money, it's a means to contribute to others, to participate in the community, and to feel that you're useful. Of course, earning money is important, but as we've said before, money is just the inevitable reward for creating value. Think about the wealthy people in our society. They have more money than they could ever spend, yet they continue to work not just out of greed, but also because they find fulfillment in contributing and feeling that I belong here. How does contributing to others serve us? Consider your own family. Imagine a messy dinner table after a meal with only the wife tidying up. Would she ever resent that? If even without hearing a thank you from her husband or children, she still knew deep down that she was invaluable to her family, that her family sees her as a partner in that family community, she is making a contribution. In the same way, when we truly understand what it means to feel part of a community, we start asking ourselves, what can I do for my partners, rather than what can they do for me? Together, these three key elements, self-acceptance, trusting others, and contributing to others, form an inseparable whole. Only by accepting our true selves can we trust others without bias. Only when we give unconditional trust and see others as partners can we truly contribute to them. And as we contribute, we come to realize, I am useful to others. That realization helps us accept ourselves, leading to self-acceptance and ultimately to a deep sense of community. Adler believed this was the ultimate remedy for our interpersonal struggles and even for achieving true happiness in life. Whether you're a student, a professional, or an entrepreneur, you must continuously connect yourself with society and with a larger community, make contributions, and in doing so, feel your own worth. Our feelings of inferiority and our inner conflicts can all be resolved by embracing a genuine sense of community. And as Adler famously said, truly understanding his ideas and transforming your life will be a long, challenging journey, one that requires gradual effort and practice. The world is simple, and everyone can be happy. This is the fifth conversation between the young man and the philosopher, and today they tackle the topic of happiness. The young man says, "Sir, you seem to reduce everything to interpersonal relationships, but isn't true self-fulfilling happiness something more universal? For example, some people aim for social success, others strive to develop a cure for cancer, and some dream of creating a timeless work of art. It seems that only by achieving those kinds of goals can one truly be happy, right?" The philosopher replies, "What we really need is the courage to be content with an ordinary life. Remember how we talked about the importance of finding a sense of community, experiencing happiness, and accepting ourselves. If we can learn to embrace being ordinary, our perspective on the world will change completely."
But how can we accept living an ordinary life? History is full of larger-than-life figures: Napoleon, Alexander, Einstein, Martin Luther King, even Socrates and Plato. They all pursued grand ideals. Although we're not geniuses and might only be average, we still need to find a goal to strive for, the young man asks. But if you're telling us to be content with ordinary lives, doesn't that mean we should simply give up and settle for mediocrity? Let's consider this. Aiming for a lofty goal is like climbing a mountain with the summit as your destination. If life were all about reaching that peak, then most of our time would be spent on the journey.
And if we believe that life truly begins only when we reach the summit, then the long trek up until that point would be seen as meaningless. What if, because of unforeseen events or illness, we never reach the top? How should we define our lives then? The philosopher explains, imagine life as a line drawn from the moment you're born with various curves along the way, ultimately reaching a peak and then ending in death. But I see life not as a single line, but as a series of continuous moments. We only live in the here and now. Our lives exist only in these fleeting instances. Older generations sometimes force young people into a predetermined path, a good university, a prestigious company, a stable family, and believe that this is the only route to happiness. If life were a line, then planning it might seem possible. But if life is really a series of moments, trying to map out your life isn't just unnecessary, it's impossible. Think about those who dream of becoming renowned violinists or lawyers. They set their sights on the summit and march toward it. But is that really the case? In truth, every moment of life is lived in the present. A person who dreams of becoming a violinist only ever experiences the music right before them, the notes, the melodies in front of their eyes. Life, in essence, is a dance of countless fleeting moments, and when we finally look back, we're often surprised to find out just how far we've come. Some who dance to the tune of the violin become professional musicians. Others who dance through the rigors of law become lawyers. Still others who dance with words become writers. And yet, many don't reach any of these specific goals because in the end, the dance itself is the purpose. We never really know where we'll end up if we're always moving. Think of life as a journey, the philosopher continues. If we wanted to travel to Egypt, would we sprint to the Great Pyramid and then rush back home? No. Travel begins the moment you step out the door, and every moment of the journey is part of the experience. This conversation reminds us that happiness isn't about achieving some grand predetermined goal. It's about how we experience the journey moment by moment. The most important thing is the present moment. Imagine you're standing on a theater stage with all the lights on so you can see every member of the audience. But if a strong spotlight is focused on you, you might not even see the people in the front row. Our lives work the same way. When we let a faint, diffused light shine on our entire life, we end up seeing our past and our future. But if we focus the spotlight on the present moment, all we see is now. That's exactly what Adler wants to tell us. We need to live more earnestly in the here and now. If we think we can see the past or predict the future, it only proves that we aren't truly living in the present. Focusing on the present means simply doing the things you can do right now with care and attention. For instance, consider a student aiming to get into a good university. The exam may be far off, but what matters is making progress every day, solving a problem, learning a new word, because today exists solely for that purpose, not for some distant exam. There's no need to draw a line towards some far-off destination. You only need to focus on how you spend each fleeting moment. In fact, the philosopher even says that it's okay to have no grand goal at all. Life is simple as long as you live seriously and without overcomplicating things. In his final conversation with the young man, the philosopher revealed that the greatest lie we tell ourselves is to be so entangled with the past and future that we neglect the present. For the present, the past and future simply don't exist. What really matters is now. Our lives aren't determined by yesterday or tomorrow, they're decided by this very moment. Everyone can free themselves from the three major constraints: the past, our interpersonal relationships, and our future. All we need is courage, a single decision. Once we change ourselves, the world will change with us. The world is always as we perceive it. It's not something someone else can change for us, only we can change it. Every single person can achieve happiness, without exception. In reality, the world is simple, and so is our life.